Hello there, Rule the Galaxy fans. This is Jessica, and tonight I have a great interview with two lovely ladies, with Emily Strand and Amy Sturgis, who are both editors for a new exciting Star Wars volume that's come out recently called Star Wars Essays Exploring a Galaxy Far, Far Away. This is a book that is already out, already available for purchase, and this is something that, we've talked about novels and comics and all kinds of things, but these kinds of nonfiction, almost academic works are kind of a beast in and of themselves. So I'm so excited to have Emily and Amy here to talk about what's gone into this volume, who would enjoy something like this, and I hope that you'll enjoy this conversation as well. So Emily and Amy, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Well, let's just, start off. I'd love if you could both, kind of introduce yourselves and just kind of how you came to be involved in a project like this. And feel free to include anything that you wish about your own background, your involvement in Star Wars and other, IP like this, and how you found yourself attached to this project.
Okay, well, I will dive in. I'm Emily Strand, and I just want to apologize right now because I'm on vacation in Western Michigan, and I've got this elaborate setup going on with my phone and my, anyway. And so I just ended up knocking over my phone just a few minutes ago. So, hey, that was me. Um, because it's all very precarious right now. So I live in Columbus, Ohio. I am originally from Cincinnati. I studied at University of Dayton for my my master's degree. And I am a theologian. I'm a theologian and a liturgist, and a church musician. So like, what happens there? How does a person like me get into Star Wars and Star Trek and Harry Potter? So I have always, it was kind of a tussle in undergraduate for me between literature and theology, which were my two kind of competing majors. I ended up kind of smushing them together into one big major. And so I've always loved books and stories, but I've always loved ideas about transcendent reality. And so I've always wanted to pursue both of those. So as I pursued my graduate degree, which is specifically in Catholicism and Catholic worship, Catholic liturgy, ritual, I continued to be an avid reader. And that was around the time that the Harry Potter books became really popular. In about 2001, 2002, they started really sweeping the nation. And so I picked those up and I was like, wow, my brain had never really been so saturated with speculative fiction before. I was more of a classics kind of reader and a no science fiction or anything like that. So my brain really lit up and I got kind of wild for Harry Potter. So I started to look into going deeper. And that was when podcasts first started being popular also. So I started listening to podcasts about Harry Potter and fighting with them, arguing with them as I ran around the track at the gym, and people thought I was crazy. And it was clear that I needed I needed a home in these podcasts. And so I didn't get that right away, but I found out about an institution that was eventually called Signum University, which is an online institution for the study of speculative fiction, like Tolkien, like Lewis, like Rowling, like science fiction, like Bradbury, like all these wonderful things, Star Wars, Star Trek, etc. And so I took several courses from Signum and graduate level, master's level courses, wrote some papers, did some really, kind of learn what literary criticism was all about in terms of these kinds of properties, especially. And then I ran into the possibility of taking a course on Harry Potter, which was kind of my goal in the first place. And of course, that course was being taught by a certain Amy H Sturgis. So I was like, ooh, I did the Hermione thing and I was, ooh, hand in the air. And Amy's course was just so great and so inspiring. I ended up writing a paper for it that ended up getting published in a scholarly anthology called Harry Potter for Nerds 2. And that kind of got me into going to conferences and talking about Harry Potter and other things. I got asked to be on a couple podcasts by then, and I could talk back finally. But then I immediately got into Amy's next course, which was on Star Wars, which I wasn't sure. This is a really long introduction, by the way. Hi. I wasn't sure if I was really going to like Star Wars. I was like, I'm kind of interested in it. I'm not really sure. I don't really like war. War's in the title. I'm not sure it's going to work out. But I ended up becoming so completely head over heels in love with Star Wars that it is sort of taken over my life, which is just fine with me. So it's really all Amy's fault. And then she taught a course on Star Trek only a couple of years ago. I took that as well. Really, really enjoyed and learned a lot from that too. I'm sure we'll get into how we got the opportunity to edit the books. So I'll turn it over at this point to Amy to introduce herself and make some excuses for her role in my life.
I will very proudly claim that. It is an honor to be a part of your amazing story, Lily. Thank you. So my story is actually kind of a flip of that, in that I grew up with science fiction. Before I ever went to school, when I was still a toddler, I was watching Star Trek, the original series, in reruns, and Star Trek, the animated series, in its original run, side by side, back and forth. And so when a new movie came out that everybody was talking about, called Star Wars, I was able to make a case that convinced my parents I was old enough to go to the theater and see it, because I was already a Star Trek fan, right? And so I went to see Star Wars in 1977, and that was the second part of the 1-2 punch with Star Trek and Star Wars that really set me on my course. So I went to kindergarten with my Leia buns and my Chewbacca knee socks, and I had the inflatable lightsaber that would then spring a leak, and then you'd either have a limp lightsaber or a lightsaber with duct tape on it. And I grew up with Star Wars and Star Trek, and fortunately, shout out to my local Star Trek, Star Wars science fiction books and comics store, Starbase 21 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They had an annual science fiction convention called Trek Expo that was Star Trek heavy, but also had quite a lot of Star Wars. And so by my teen years, I was going to my local science fiction convention. I was reading fan fiction, which I discovered, which, because I'm old, was in fanzine form that was mimeographed and sent about. And so I grew up with that as part of my life, and with those competing narratives of Star Trek with one particular view of history and Star Wars with a very different view of history, sort of in conversation in my worldview and my understanding of the universe. And so I ended up becoming a historian, and I did my PhD at Vanderbilt in intellectual history, which is the history of ideas. And it seemed very natural to me then to go to science fiction to study the history of ideas, because science fiction is the genre in which the ideas are the heroes. So I have been really fortunate to get to turn my fandom into also an academic career. And I teach undergraduate courses and graduate courses. I'm at Lenore-Ryan University and Signum University for graduate courses. And I've been able to teach and write about and publish on Star Trek and Star Wars and the Gothic and science fiction authors like Lois McMaster Bujold and people like that, and Harry Potter and other things as well. And since 2015, I've been very fortunate every year, sometimes every semester, including summers, to be able to teach either an undergraduate or a graduate course on Star Wars. And so it's really exciting to me to see this as this intergenerational phenomenon where my parents love Star Wars, I love Star Wars, and so does my sister. Now there's another generation of my family who that also loves Star Wars, but also seeing students come to Star Wars from so many different entry points and how that changes the questions they ask of Star Wars and also the answers they take from Star Wars. So it's been a real thrill. And then when, as we'll talk about a bit, Emily very, very kindly invited me to be a part of this adventure with her. It was a no-brainer to get to work with her and to get to work on these texts that mean so much to me.
That's so lovely. I mean, thanks so much for that, detailed overview of both of your backgrounds. Kind of fun to see connections. I have 2 degrees in history, both in theology. So seems like I kind of overlap
Nice.
with both of you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to pick your brains, more in both of those regards, but maybe that'll be for another time. But I love books like this, being from academic spaces, the idea of edited volumes where everybody's contributing a chapter on a topic that, a broader topic that everybody's interested in. It's like I love that. I love that idea of being able to like just kind of bring all of these voices together to have people contribute their own little niche topics. And with this work in particular, I mean, there's just such a wide breadth of topics and ideas, something that's going to appeal to everybody. So please, why don't we talk a little bit about the genesis of this book and kind of the vision from the start.
Okay, I will start that story. It starts with midichlorians, as all good stories do. I gave, I think it was in February, no, it must have been February 2021. I gave a talk at the Southwest Popular and American Culture Conference. It was online because of the pandemic. And I gave a talk about midichlorians. And it was from a paper I had written for one of Amy's courses. And it was a sort of defense of midichlorians. I've never understood why people will just accept that, like in Harry Potter, you either get your owl from Hogwarts at 11 or you don't. And it's all fine either way. It's more exciting if you're a wizard, but still, it's not like this horrible thing if you don't. But then in Star Wars, like this one mention of midichlorians sent everybody through the ceiling about how, oh, now the Force is being gate kept and only special people can access the Force. And it's like, no, it's really just the same thing as Harry Potter. And also, Qui-Gon said, midichlorians, everybody has them, right? If you have cells, you have midichlorians, right? So anyway, so it always kind of drove me nuts. So I wrote this paper, as you can imagine, from just that little snippet. The paper was like basically 15 minutes of me ranting and giving all this textual evidence about why midichlorians really just aren't as bad as everybody says they are. And it was in a panel that was a panel that was devoted to Star Wars and Star Trek. So I didn't really think much about it. Other than that, it was fun and I was appreciative of the opportunity. But then about a couple weeks later, I get this email from an acquisitions editor at Vernon Press saying, hey, would you like to edit a scholarly volume and think about putting together a proposal for a scholarly volume on Star Wars and Star Trek? And I was like, yes, yes, but I definitely don't want to do it by myself, especially since, I was pretty well versed in Star Wars at that point. Star Trek was still something I was kind of pulling on memories from my childhood watching the original series. Hadn't really kept up with a lot of the different shows, and I knew enough to know that there was a lot of Star Trek. And so I immediately thought of Amy, and I thought, gosh, this would be fun for us to do together. And back then it was just a singular volume that was envisioned. And so I will turn it over to Amy. Amy, you want to pick up the story from there?
Thank you. Yes, so you came to me and invited me to be a part of it, which was absolutely thrilling and the easiest decision ever made. And so we put out this call for papers for completely multidisciplinary, sky's the limit. What have you got for us? Call for papers for Star Wars and Star Trek. And it quickly became obvious to us that with the responses we were getting from scholars all over the world, that we didn't have one book that was half Star Trek and half Star Wars. We had 2 books. And fortunately, Vernon Press was on board with that. And so we split the projects, and both of us ended up very involved with both books, but I ended up sort of taking the lead on the Star Trek volume and also contributing an essay, and Emily took the lead on the Star Wars volume and also contributed an essay. And we worked together across this time to really try to balance in both books. They have similarities in this regard. This idea of how we take a snapshot of decades of storytelling, of multimedia storytelling in these franchises. So, for example, in the case of Star Wars here, we have works that are using a microscope to look at Star Wars and works that are pulling back with a wide angle lens to see really big patterns. But we didn't want to limit it to films or television series. So we were able to find really remarkable scholarship on games and scholarship on tie-in materials like novels and comics and those sorts of things, and about the language generation that can be traced in Star Wars and Star Trek, actually. So the goal there was not to limit ourselves, but to pick the best proposals we could find and then work with those authors to make a project that would then show the depth and breadth of what's being done at the time, and looking back from 1977 to 2023, what is Star Wars telling us? And so we've been really excited. Also, with the idea that this should be a project that can be taught, that can go to classes and show, here's what a philosopher would say, here's what a theologian would say, here's what a political scientist would say, but also that any interested fan could pick this up and it would be accessible. And there's not any kind of barrier to entry with jargon from one little discipline off here in the corner, but that it's all accessible and something that anyone who's interested could pick up. And so it's just been a fantastic experience. And I should add one more thing, and that is we really had a fantastic honor of getting to work with a cover artist, Emily Austin, who did original cover art for both of the books. And I'm just in love with the with the cover. So cool. So we've just had a really fantastic opportunity to connect with creators who were all invested, as we are, in getting the messages across in a way that we hope will appeal to a lot of people.
I really think that you've hit the nail right on the head. I really love, like I said, like coming from academic spaces, I love this. It feels very academic, but then when you read it, like it's not filled with academic jargon. This is the kind of thing that like maybe not everybody is going to want to read essays of this style, but please, if you're not, if you don't see yourself as academic, don't let that be a barrier to you picking up this book, because this is just like the kind of thing, like if you have a passing curiosity about any of the themes or the topics in this book, like this is going to be a fabulous book for anybody. I also love the fact that you said that you didn't want to put limitations on what kind of content could be included, or that it sounds like the publisher didn't impose any limitations. I spoke with Stephen Kent, who recently wrote How the Force Can Fix the World's great, political, kind of a reflection on Star Wars and the virtues that we should be cultivating as we live in multicultural community, and just, like how Star Wars can make us better people. And he's got so much in there reflecting on politics and culture and all of these kinds of things, and I loved it so much. But I think it's kind of funny that Emily, you mentioned like, kind of being wary about Star Wars, got war in the title. Well, see, that's see I fixed that by just hyperfixating on the pacifist. So I love Satine Kryze and pacifist yes. Mandalore. That's what yes. That's my specialty, and I felt like her presence was very much missing in Stephen's book. And so I had asked him about, why, did you have any thoughts about including her? And ultimately, but also being in publishing, I kind of knew that her inclusion was probably less his choice and probably more something coming from the publisher saying, let's stick with the live action material that more people are going to know. And he confirmed that, yeah, that was kind of the case with that. So I love, what I've looked at in the book, just as an example, Amy Rishow, is that how you say her last name? She has a wonderful essay on the evolution of the Twi'leks in the Star Wars universe. And so going from, right from Ula in the original trilogy all the way up to, what we've gotten very recently with, characters, multiple characters in Book of Boba Fett and in the High Republic series. And I love that she was able to get, Legends material, comics, video games, all kinds of stuff to be able to trace the evolution of the way that, the role that the Twi'lek people have played in Star Wars. And it's a fascinating topic, especially considering Amy brings it around to the idea of the other in Star Wars, and making sure that we're looking at this like, this isn't just about this fictional race of people, of humanoids. It speaks to something much more about the way we tell our stories and who we center in our stories, what they mean to our stories. And so these kinds of works I think are so important, because I think that we can get so bogged down in just kind of like little fandom tiffs, just little Twitter arguments and these kinds of things. But this is the kind of stuff where you get really, really intelligent and deep thinking people offering different thoughts that you just might not think about unless you take the time to delve into them as deeply as all of these lovely scholars have.
And Jessica, that's really a great point, because we took, I mean, this is a multi-year process, right? So from the creation of a proposal, that goes to, to answer to the call for proposals, to the acceptance of it, and then the tweaking of the idea, like, what is going to be your main point with this? Like, this is great that you want to do this, but what is going to be, what conclusions can you draw from these things? And Amy Rishow just did such a fabulous job in giving us that the answer to that so what question. So Twi'leks have come through this evolution. So why should we care about this? Her proposal was just so exciting to me when I first read it. I was just like, oh, we have to do this. This is going to be so good. Another one that was like that for me was Eloise Thompson Tremblay's chapter about mothers in Star Wars. I mean, basically what Eloise had to say to me was mothers and Star Wars. And I was like, yes, we're doing it, because there's so much to be said. And I've always thought that was just an area that the story just necessarily, I say necessarily, maybe an argument could be made that it's not necessary, but necessarily just sort of glosses over to get to the action of the story. But you have these women standing there, left behind by the narrative, and so often disempowered by the narrative and by the male hero of the story. I was flipping. Okay, I'm going to be honest. The book is still new. It's at my house. I'm on vacation, so I don't have it. I have a digital copy in front of me, but I was picking it up, and I was, holding it as you do a new baby. And I was leafing through it, and I was kind of, just kind of flipping through it. And I flipped to a page, and it was this entire section on Shmi Skywalker. And I'm like, I saw the section header, and then I flipped, and then I flipped, and then I flipped, and it was still the section on Shmi Skywalker. And I was like, yes, somebody is writing this much on Shmi Skywalker, because I really don't think anyone ever has, maybe on a blog somewhere, maybe, and God bless those folks, for devoting that time. But in an academic work of literary analysis on this, for that much devotion to be devoted to Shmi, or that much analysis to be devoted to Shmi. And what she did was she revealed so many wonderful truths about the character that just fly by in the one film that she's in, the two films that she's in, they just fly by. And then she's a plot device, and we've moved on, right? And she's there to make sure Anakin gets to the next stage of his development. And instead, Eloise took the time to really tear that apart and find out what's making it tick. And I just, those moments were just so special to me to kind of foster along and to say, just to keep asking the questions and saying, okay, more here, or what about this? It was just such a privilege to be part of that with people.
And if I could jump on that, one other thing that what both of you said made me think of is this is being a multi-year process and constantly working. We went through blind peer review with scholars to make sure all of these works were exactly where they needed to be and such. But we also really had the good fortune that both the press and, most importantly, the authors were committed to having this be, each of the works be as up to date as possible. And so you had some really fruitful lines of questioning about Star Wars that could be updated. And several of these went through updates, not because they hadn't thought about things, but did you see what just happened in Andor? Okay, well, we're going to need a new section. And and as you were just talking about the Twi'lek episode, the Twi'lek essay is a perfect example. Vicky Turilli's essay on makers and craftspeople in the Disney era of Star Wars has a fascinating section brought up, really up to the moment with the latest streaming works. And the same is true for Emily's chapter on 2187 and bringing Andor into that. And one of the things that I found really delightful is seeing how these speculations connecting the dots, there are messages here. We saw that unfolding in real time as Book of Boba Fett and Andor and Mandalorian were saying things that in fact provided more evidence to support these arguments. And we had the good fortune to be able to go back and say, we need to bring this in and make it as up to date as possible, because this just adds, to the meatiness of these analyses. And so we were able to do that. And I think it speaks a lot to how devoted these authors were, that they wanted to take these arguments all the way and make them as up to date as possible. But it's also exciting because of the timing of the publication. This, I believe, is one of the very first works that will bring in analysis of everything from 1977 up through the present day and capture information about some of these new streaming series and new novels and works that are really up to the moment and show continuity and at times, rupture in this larger picture of where Star Wars is going, but the big picture at any rate.
Yeah. I really love the idea that, like, not only do all of these authors get the chance to talk about their individual little blorbos and the characters and the themes that they care about, but it's fun to be able to take the, like you said, the microscopic look and then the macroscopic look and trace evolutions of these things. And like you said, sometimes there are ruptures, and I like that books like this can provide a place for that kind of exploration that is equal parts celebration and a little bit of criticism. I just think that, like, there's a thriving fandom that I think lives on arguing together, and you know what, that's never going to change. But I personally wish that there was an easier way to come together and say, hey, the reason that we're all here having big arguments is because we love this stuff. We argue because we love. And what I do like is that in formats like this, you're able to kind of step back and that ability to celebrate something, even while maybe recognizing that something doesn't fit into your continuity of interpretation, or it offers a place to be able to bring those thoughts without it having to be like, oh well, you're just dragging this into the mud. It's a place to explore.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a sense, you might drag something into the mud because you have enough esteem for it that you think it can take it, and you can get a little dirty, and then you can take it and wash it off and keep playing with it. If that's, Dr. Andy Higgins wrote this great chapter on the language development in Star Wars. And to be honest, in 2023, it's a bit of a dicey story. And, that had to be acknowledged in the chapter. And you know, Andy worked really hard to make sure that that part of the story came through. And because there was cultural appropriation that went on, and there was just plain old, you know, some dicey business with regard to the way that some of the audio was collected by some of the makers of Star Wars. You know, giving people, you know, giving indigenous folks alcohol in order to tell folk tales. I mean, that's kind of thing that we really, really don't want to see today. And the sort of thing that invented language experts say this is exactly what not to do, right? When you're trying to invent languages. And so that had to be acknowledged. But on the whole, the chapter is just, to me, it just strikes as honest. It just strikes as I'm gonna try to tell the story as honestly as I can, while still holding this franchise up as an innovator and as a very important force, an important voice in the realm of invented languages. And there's no getting around that. There's no getting around that. There's no saying, oh, well, Star Trek is better, or you know, this other thing is better. You know, Star Wars made an invaluable contribution to, and is still making invaluable contributions to invented languages. And it's broadening its own horizons. It's kind of evolved unto itself. And so that's one of those things that, yeah, I feel like you got to get in and wrestle with it and get a little dirty with it if you want to really get to the bottom of it. Sure, we can put everything up on a pedestal and just revere it, but I don't know if that kind of devotion really lasts. I think when you know, it's almost like a relationship where it's like, you know, you got to get to know the real person. You may not like everything you find, but that doesn't mean you stop loving that person. You don't stop being in a relationship with that person. You just learn, you know, what you can live with and what you can't, and you know, try to live in truth.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just it's not an either or. It's this is the kind of stuff that requires you to be willing to kind of wrestle with that stuff, and to recognize that there are ways to celebrate, ways to criticize, and ways to just like still approach the material in a holistic way that says this is valuable stuff, but it's not above reproach.
Hmm. Hmm. Exactly. Exactly.
So then in that regards, you know, as you're going through the actual process, after you've notified the authors that they're going to be able to have a chapter in a book like this, um you know, tell me a little bit more about the process as it continues on, you know, this very long gestation period of your literary baby. What
Hmm.
happens, what happens to really hone the chapters? What happens if there's you know, I don't know if there's disagreements or a desire to focus more on one thing. How do you get it to a place where all of these different voices are able to be put together into a cohesive book?
Okay, I can get us started, and then Amy, I'll pass the baton to you. So a lot of emails. I don't know if anybody else feels that they're I'm kind of old, so I feel like my life sort of revolves around emails. And I'm a work from home. I'm an online instructor, so I do a lot of that sort of work from home. But then this whole project has been a big work from home thing. So email is the key. So we set a deadline for first drafts for our contributors after they were accepted, and then you know, they all turned in drafts, and we gave them, you know, guidelines in terms of how long it should be, and the kind of citation style we were using, and other little formatting things that might be helpful to them as they compose their essays. And then they turned in essays, first drafts, to us. And then, you know, I think Amy's and my job at that point was to read the essay, not sit there with our red pen, purple pen in my case, but rather just read the essay and just see how it reads. You know, just kind of take a look at what's there. And then for me, I would do that, and then I would kind of go back and start going through it, and just, it was a lot of asking questions like, okay, so you've said this, but what about this aspect? Or you've said this, have you considered this other thing too? Or you know, of course, if there were any, you know, sort of like issues in terms of like maybe a source that there was a source that the author may not have known about, maybe
Yep.
you know, like a book, a fiction book, or a comic book even. There's some really important information about some of these characters that are being dealt with in comics, So to draw their attention to that, or maybe there's a TV show, an episode of a TV show that maybe deserved a little. There's so much Clone Wars, like it's kind of like, whoa, you really got to know a lot of Clone Wars. And fortunately, I have a 12-year-old son who's basically obsessed with Clone Wars, so he's got it on in the background like every single day. And so a lot of times I'll say, hey, this one character, were they ever in Clone Wars? Oh yeah, they were in season 5 episode, so I'll just use my little research assistant to say, you should watch that Clone Wars thing and then comment on that too, just because we want to have a complete analysis, right? And that's why too, many heads are better than one. And so, nobody is expected to just know all this stuff and have the map in their head, except Amy Raquel. I think she pretty much does, which we are grateful for. But so that was kind of the process. And then we would send it back to them and say, hey, here's a kind of a bulleted outline of, we would kind of Amy and I would kind of gather our thoughts, and we would put it all into one communication and say, hey, here are the things that we have to say about your chapter. You want to take another stab at it? And it was never like okay, totally rewrite this. It was always just like, okay, take it again and go through it again and maybe think about these things and see what you come up with. So Amy, you want to take the process from there?
Sure. Yes. So we would get then a revision back from each of the authors, and that's the point then when this becomes the academic book, because for Vernon Press, and we are in the series in cinema and culture, which is the subset here of where our books go. A requirement is blind peer review, which means really some research on our end, because we chose to take that on ourselves, and I think it was a great move to find for each work, and given that we've got different disciplines represented here and different approaches and different arguments, for each approach, each essay, who would be an expert with the same kind of disciplinary background, right, coming from the same field, a scholarly expert with proven publications, who would be considered an authority, who could look at this not knowing who wrote it and just give honest feedback on it. And so every work in the book has passed peer review from an expert who read it and said, yes, this meets all of the standards of our discipline. And sometimes there's feedback there. Perhaps here's a source that would be really important to add here. A really authoritative voice in the field that you can't, you shouldn't talk about this without bringing this person in. Those sorts of suggestions come back from peer review. And then there's another round often of revision. But that also proves that even though we've already had many cooks in this kitchen with the author and with us, that someone who didn't have any vested interest in the book, but did have a long proven history in the field and an interest in keeping this conversation at the highest possible level, agreed that this is a contribution and this meets everything we need to have for this to be considered a proper scholarly work on this topic from this discipline. So that, as you might imagine, takes a long time because also these experts are doing a lot of other things. That's why they're experts. So having the time to take revised essays and send those out and then get responses back and do any revisions necessary. That was another time period there in this whole project. And then it goes through all of the things that have to happen for formatting and being put in the proper context and the proper format for the press, which includes all sorts of things that you might not think of, like having keywords and abstracts and things that can be used in online searches and that sort of thing. And so each time this happened, we also had the chance to put in some new material. And so we were constantly going back and thinking, hey, did something in Book of Boba Fett speak to this? Is there a new novel? Or is there a new comic that has something to say about this? So finally then, yeah, the whole process comes together. And then we also had the fantastic experience of getting to have, well, contributors. John Jackson Miller has written some of my absolute favorite Star Wars novels, and it was a thrill. He's a scholar as well as a fantastic author of comics and novels. But we also then had the chance to get a truly wonderful forward. Let me throw that back to Emily real quickly. That was sort of the icing on the cake there, and Emily was the one who made that happen.
Yes.
But it was very exciting.
The delicious Shakespearean cake.
Yes, that's right.
So I am co-host of a podcast called Potterversity, which is an academic Harry Potter podcast. And we have a wonderful producer, Laurie Beckoff. I will give her props right now because I don't know what she was. Oh, she's a big Shakespeare person. And she had performed during the pandemic. She had performed some of Ian Desher's Shakespearean versions of Star Wars, Shakespearean pastiches of Star Wars. And so she had participated in that online, and she just got kind of curious about Ian Desher. And so she got on his website and she was reading that he had proposed to do a Shakespearean rendering of the founding of Hogwarts. And he had proposed this to Warner Brothers and J.K. Rowling and whoever the powers that be would be to, and they had politely declined that. But Laurie was like, oh my gosh, what a cool guy. And Ian has multiple master's degrees, in divinity. He's got a master's of divinity, I think. And he's a super interesting, very, very well-educated guy. And so she reached out to him and she said, would you be interested in talking about your proposal, this proposal that didn't make it, on our podcast, just as a kind of a thought experiment, and he said, yeah, sure. And he came on our podcast and he was just lovely, just so interesting to talk to, and so, so knowledgeable, so witty, and just, we had so much to say with him on the podcast. And I kind of, I didn't think too much about it after that. But then when we got the opportunity to do these books, and we knew that we needed somebody to write the forward, and obviously it's a great thing to have somebody with name recognition and with Star Wars, who's participated in building up the Star Wars galaxy. So I reached out to Ian, and he was very wonderful about giving us just a great forward. I really loved his forward about just the wonder that inspires love of Star Wars, and how kind of it starts with wonder, and then it goes through kind of all these phases, and like even the academic phase where you're wrestling with it, and you're trying to reconcile it or trying to compare it with what you do academically, and you kind of analyze it from that point of view, and then but really it all just comes back to wonder. And then a new TV show like Andor comes on, and you're just like reduced to like like all these academic thoughts, they go out the window for a few minutes, and then they come rushing back, and it's all about the wonder once again. And so Ian was really, really wonderful about all that. Thanks, Ian.
I love that.
And thanks, Laurie Beckoff.
I think that you could do an entire edited volume on Andor alone. I think that show was so deep.
Agreed.
And I think that you would have a lot of proposals, because I think that ignited very academic thoughts in a lot of people.
Oh.
Well, Amy and I participated in an online academic conference called Realizing Resistance, episode 3. That was their third, and it's all devoted to Star Wars scholarship. Oh my gosh, the Andor presence! I mean, Andor was in the room the entire online 3-day conference. I mean, that show was just ever present. There's so many people who want to talk about Andor, including us. Both of us had papers that we gave about Andor. It was a lot less light and fluffy than my midichlorians talk, I think, but horses for courses, as the British say.
Well, that might be something to think about, especially after I'm sure that season 2 is going to be just as meaty. And probably not any more light and fluffy than the first one was.
Yeah, mind-blowing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, in the time that we have left, I guess what I would like to do is just kind of I have not asked you this previously, so authors listening to this, don't take this as you've been forgotten or you're being lauded alone. But just kind of off the top of your head, what are just some of the essays, some of the content, some of the stories that even might have happened in the production of this that you just really associate with this book? The things that just really stand out, like this, that is what the identity of this book is encapsulated by.
Okay, I will start. I feel like we've talked about the first 3 chapters. We mentioned my chapter, but then the very next chapter is by our good friend Katie McDaniel, and she is my co-host at Potterversity, and she just did this wonderful chapter about Ray and Harry. So Harry Potter, that is, and how they are kind of kindred heroes, and the elements of the stories that make them kindred heroes, especially maps and mirrors. And she explains how they come into their own heroic identity through these sort of mirror moments that serve as maps to their sort of destined, heroic persona. And it's just first of all, I mean, Katie's just a wonderful writer. It's a beautifully written chapter, but it's also so insightful in terms of these 2 franchises, which seem like, I don't know. Star Wars always seemed so much older and more venerable than Harry Potter to me, but when you kind of lay them out side by side, they're really contemporaries, and they're especially going to look like contemporaries in about 30 years from now, and or sooner. And so I really feel like her chapter is just a great reflection on these stories of heroes in our modern age, and the kinds of ways they speak to us as audiences. So I'll throw it. So that's one from me. I'll throw it back to Amy for another one.
Oh gosh. Okay, that's rough for me. I'm going to actually answer in
Sorry.
a slightly different way here. I would first say, in the area that I am very committed to and have been interested in all of my life, which is in tie-in information, the extra filmic stories, so the novels and the comics and such like that. It was a real thrill to get to work with John Jackson Miller, whose work is very, very, very high on my list of authors, telling stories, and whose work crucially has bridged the span of both Legends and Disney era work. So one of his novels, like Kenobi, which I think of very highly of, I love that novel, is now considered Legends. But A New Dawn, the very first work telling story from Rebels, is considered to be canon now. And to have his perspective on the big picture of tie-in material and what we mean when we talk about canonicity and the relationship of the films and the series to the printed stories, how these relate to each other and sometimes don't, and what that move, putting some works in the category of Legends and then restarting canon in a new way, what that means and why it happened, and how creators now and storytellers now are reaching back and pulling forward inspirations and things that matter to them from Legends so that they live again in new canon. That fascinated me. But I also just want to give a really quick shout out here. It's really hard to narrow these down, but in an area that is sort of one of my blind spots in Star Wars, and in fact in genre storytelling, is gaming. And I appreciate how powerful those stories are, but it's not something I have as much personal experience with. And so I sometimes need a guide to sort of explain this to me, and someone who really knows. And I really appreciate Aaron Masters' look at Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords, and how we're given morality tales and choices that really lead to deep moral questions and wrestling with powerful moral quandaries, and how this shows the depth of Star Wars storytelling and how it challenges us to think about right and wrong, and how it challenges us to grow as people. To have a knowledgeable guide like that who's looking at a game and being able to sort of expose the story in its depth there was really helpful to me. And I also want to say, speaking of gaming, Jennifer Russell Long has an amazing essay on in-universe gaming in Sabak, which again was something, because that's a blind spot I hadn't really thought about that much. And so again, experts seeing things I would never have seen, and then immediately once they open that up to me, I say, oh, of course. And now what I was seeing in black and white is now Technicolor, or what I was seeing in 2D is now 3D. So it's a joy to be taught by these authors. Sorry, I cheated there.
No,
too many.
no,
I'll throw it back to
you did great. You did great. And I will follow up to say, Jenny Russell Long, I mean, that was just such a pleasure to go through that process with her, of getting this essay ready for publication. And Jessica, you asked earlier as part of your, I think your previous question, were there ever like disagreements about, what should happen, or like, I mean, I'm just going to say right here, no, there were not, because everybody was just such a team player. Everybody just wanted to make their writing and everybody's writing just as good as it possibly can be. And so everybody just had these wonderful, gracious attitudes, even when we went back and forth. And I mean, Jenny's is the one essay in the book where there were times when I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like above my pay grade in terms of like some of the concepts, game studies, and like the kind of cultural learning and cultural knowing that is promoted by playing an in-universe game, almost like a role-playing game, and how that can develop cultural memory and cultural understandings that you can apply to real life situations, such as other artifact studies promote, and so that was really interesting. But Jenny and I just went back and forth so long, I felt like we just needed to go get coffee after. Someday, I still hope that someday we will, Jenny. That's a for real invitation. And I would just echo everything Amy said about the other chapters that she mentioned. I will also mention Paul Johnson's essay, chapter 8, This is the Way, the Mandalorian and the Evolving Serial Medium. I mean, Paul, I just feel like from the first moment, Paul handed us a really excellent essay, and it was a joy to, I hadn't thought about. I mean, I was just so bowled away by how much I love The Mandalorian. I like all the Star Wars, so I like the Andor Star Wars, and I like the wild and crazy Mandalorian Star Wars. Like, I love it all, right? And so I hadn't really thought about why. And Paul brings up so many behind the scenes method factors of that show, with the volume, with the serial nature of it, with the way it was released and the timing with which it was released, that make me realize that, yeah, I love it. And there's a lot of really wonderful reasons that I love it that are by design. And that doesn't take away from the loving. For me, I'm just like, okay, I'm your target audience. Here we go. Right. So Paul's was really great. We already mentioned Dr. Andrew Higgins' essay on the language development in Star Wars. Really such a fascinating story from start to finish. So yeah, and then I will say, just to plug my own chapter a little bit, 2187, the best thing anybody can say, and I've heard this a few times now, the best thing anybody can say to me about the chapter is that after they read it, they went and watched Arthur Lipsett's short film, the National Film Board of Canada, 2187. And that is exactly the whole reason I wrote that article, because I feel like this is a very underappreciated and profound, deep, broad and wide influence on Star Wars, not just George Lucas Star Wars, but Star Wars that's being created today. And I really feel that the more we can understand and recognize the greatness of that film and its filmmaker, and the way he thought and the way he thought about life, the more we can understand what's going on in Star Wars. So I will just say that much for mine. Go watch 2187 by Arthur Lipsett. It's free online.
And read this essay, because it does change the way you appreciate Star Wars it's a fantastic essay, and Emily talked about some of her insights there at that conference that she mentioned, the Realizing Resistance conference. And I lost track of the number of people who were just making the mind blown expression. I was like, thank you, because I've been experiencing that for the last year, reading and rereading this essay. So I'm glad to know I'm not the only one whose mind is blown, but it's fantastic. It's feathering the cap of this book.
It was fun to have a Google Slides thing that went along with it, because like, you know, in a chapter, you can't like show video clips and like put them next to each other and play them at the same time and say, look at what they're doing here. Look at what they're doing. Like they're making it just like this film. You know, I got to do that at this Realizing Resistance Con. It was so much fun.
That's wonderful. Well, if that doesn't convince you that there's something in this book for everybody, I don't know what is. I love the idea, language, and you've got Knights of the Old Republic in there, for the gamers, and the all of these different looks at I love that, like, a whole section, like part 3 of it, is exploring the multimedia storytelling. So it's looking at those behind the scenes, looking at the technology. So there truly is something for everybody in this book. So I mean, people can pick this book up through Amazon, through other booksellers. Is that where they should be going to purchase it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I know that Vernon Press has offered a new release discount of 24%, and they have an order code. So if you go, my Twitter handle is at EKC Strand. And if you go to the top of my Twitter profile, or 10, as I like to call it now, you will find that order code for that 24% discount. Now, I mean, we will say that these books are marketed to institutions and academic libraries, so the price point is high for both the Star Wars and the Star Trek. But if it's above your budget for books, a great solution is to ask your local library, whether it's your public library or an academic library, to order it so that you can have access to it.
And
do you know if they have a digital version, something that can also show up on Libby or other apps like that as well?
They do, and libraries will get some, but the price point to purchase it is pretty much the same as the hardcover book.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Amy, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to say that in terms of requesting it from your library, it is available in ebook and hardcover form. And if there is the possibility of a paperback in the future, should people show enough interest, either by purchasing it or by requesting it at the libraries. So our fingers and toes and tentacles are crossed.
Wonderful. Yeah, that is always an issue when it comes to academic books. So hopefully there will be ways to get this out there to people so that everybody can enjoy it as well. But thank you both for being willing to come on tonight. I guess as we end, what I would just love to know is, what are you excited about in the Star Wars universe going forward? Are there shows that you're particularly excited about, books or other material that that you're looking forward to, or even in regards to maybe you can't talk specifically about a lot of things, but any projects that you have, any desires that you have for the future?
Well, I will start. I will tell you that I have about 6 yards of this beautiful brown wool Melton in my basement, in a box in my basement, that I am looking forward to sewing into a new winter Jedi cloak for myself, because I am a member of the Rebel Legion and the 501st, and I enjoy doing a lot of charity events around my hometown, or I should say the town I live in, of Columbus, Ohio. So that's something I'm really looking forward to, and continuing my work with them. I'm just, I'm such a Rebels fan. Like, it's some of my favorite Star Wars. I remember Amy saying in the first class I took with her, saying, that she thought that what was going on in Rebels was some of the most interesting things happening in Star Wars at the time. And it was like, it was 2015, fall of 2015. And I remember thinking, really? It's a cartoon and she's saying this about it, and so I went and checked it out myself, and I have been hooked. my kid is hooked. We got our neighbor kids hooked. I mean, I just like shake people and go, you have to watch Rebels. So just the idea that, Dave Filoni has said that Ahsoka is basically Rebel season 5. I'm just like, I'm totally here for Rebel season 5. So especially live action. I'm super excited about that. Can't wait to see what we learn.
So yes, I am excited about Ahsoka tremendously. I'm really, really excited about Andor, the next season, of course, knowing that we're coming right up to what has become my favorite Star Wars film, Rogue One. And so I'm really invested in the storytelling and the singular vision of that series. So I'm ready for Andor. I am also really looking forward to some more material from High Republic. I think we're getting a collection out that's going to take us back to Jeddah again and collect some stories there. And because I am very interested in the Guardians of the Wills and Jeddah, I'm interested in stories from Jeddah from all times. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm also interested in perhaps doing a little bit more with some work I've been doing that looks at issues that are brought up in Andor and also in Rogue One, and some of the tie-in material, such as the Guardians of the Wills novel and the adaptations that have come from that, Greg Rucka's storytelling. So we'll see what happens there. It's a really exciting time to be interested in Star Wars. So there's a lot to be excited about. And I'm always excited to see what comes out of Emily's costuming expertise. So I get to see all of the photos of her fashion sessions as she's creating these new costumes. So that's a thrill too, because I have none of that creativity. So I can just look and admire and see what characters she becomes.
I make Amy be my audience for it all. She gets the preview picture. I'm looking forward to them having a provable High Republic Jedi costume. So I feel like I have 2 Jedi already. I feel like that's my next Jedi, but we need the costume standards for the Rebel Legion so that we can get approved and wear them out to events and stuff. So looking forward to that.
Oh, and how cool does the acolyte look? Sorry, I'm very, very excited about that as well. Everything I hear about that, just again, mind blown. So
yes,
exciting.
yes.
I wasn't that excited for it until everything that they revealed at Star Wars Celebration. And, of course, that's where, I was kind of like, okay, this seems interesting. Not super interested from a tale, like from a Darksider's perspective, but I'm interested in this time period. But then I swear, as soon as I saw those white and gold robes on the screen, I was like, okay, here we go. And then especially now that we know that Vernestra will be in it, I mean, that reveal at Celebration was unlike anything I've ever witnessed. Like that was so. I mean, truly. I mean, everything up here. I got my whole shelf of High Republic stuff. And it's been so much fun to find community. I mean, that truly was the highlight of Star Wars Celebration for me, was the fact that like all of these books have come out. And while you can also find people on Twitter, you're not likely to find people in your life who like the novels the way that you're gonna at least find friends who are like, oh yeah, I love Star Wars. I love the movies. I've seen the movies. And so to be able to go and find communities there and dress up and cosplay and meet the authors, like it's so much fun that this franchise and franchises like it offers so many opportunities for community, not just in events like that, but even in works like this book.
Yeah, absolutely. When about 3 events into trooping with the Rebel Legion and the 501st, that I realized I found my nerds. Like these are my nerds, and it is amazing to be local with these people too, and have these in-person relationships that we can also foster with digital communication, but yeah, and I do feel like this book does create a community of scholars who, we're ACA fans, right? We're not just fans and we're not just academics. We are all people who, to some extent are willing to admit that we're big fans of the thing that we study, and that sharpens our analysis of it. It kind of deepens and you know, helps us to do what we do with this with Star Wars and with other things. A lot of our scholars work on other properties as well. And so yeah, you're right. It does create a wonderful community across space and time.
Yeah, like I said, something for everybody. You find your niche, you find your community there. I love the fact that in spite of all of its drama and foibles, these kinds of franchises are able to facilitate that. So I'm grateful that I've found Star Wars. It sounds like you guys are grateful that you have found Star Wars, and we can all be grateful together.
Absolutely. And grateful for opportunities like this in your podcast to have these kinds of conversations. That's really important.
Well, absolutely, and we're so happy that you were willing to do so. I hope that this has convinced some people to go and you know, at least try to find a way to pick up the book and to enjoy it. And you know, goodness, let's just keep the excitement going. You know, whatever is coming, let's think big thoughts and cultivate that community. And I hope to be able to see a lot more from both of you in the future as well. So to our listeners, thank you so much for your continued support. We love and appreciate you so much. The guys will be back next week, and we've got a very exciting guest coming up. So tune in to see our interview with Vanessa Marshall. That'll be a wonderfully exciting time. And I guess in everything, just go and enjoy Star Wars, enjoy everything that this franchise has given us. So have a great night, everybody, and may the force be with you.